The setting is Auburn Prison, New York. On the gray morning of August 6, 1890, the air in the inner courtyard is saturated, heavy with the thick scent of polished oak and an electrical anticipation that borders on the unbearable, almost palpable against the skin. William Kemmler, an ordinary man destined for an extraordinary end, walks toward a throne of wood and electrodes that promise to be the pinnacle of modern civilization and punitive technocracy. In that claustrophobic room, the witnesses were not just observing a rite of justice, they were examining, without knowing it, a closed electrical circuit designed for a massive and catastrophic resistance failure. Historically, the chair was marketed in the late 19th century by figures like Harold Brown, under the shadow of Thomas Edison's War of Currents, as a scientific, clean, and humanitarian alternative to the clumsy rope. However, under the cold and surgical gaze of a forensic engineer, the electric chair reveals itself as one of the most violent experiments in thermodynamics and heat transfer ever performed on a biological subject. To understand this technical brutality, we must discard the vague vocabulary of shock and adopt the rigorous physics of joule heating. We are not facing a controlled biological process, but a thermokinetic overload of an inefficient electrical system attempting to forcibly transform flesh and bone into a high-performance conductor. Before we dissect the molecular levels of this execution and understand how physics hijacks life through heat and pressure, if you seek to understand the science behind history's darkest secrets with unshakable technical rigor, subscribe now to DaVinci Explains. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our historical autopsies, and join a community that values raw evidence over myth. Let's look at what history ignores. To physics, the human body is a remarkably poor and heterogeneous conductor. It is not a uniform copper wire. It is, in fact, a complex biological resistor encased in an insulating membrane, the skin. When the metal electrodes and brine-zan-soaked sponges are fixed, and 20 volts of alternating current are injected into the system, the body is forced to act as a high-zan impedance resistor. According to Joule's first law, expressed by the equation Q I break Q I 2 do retent, the heat generated within the tissues is directly proportional to the square of the current I, multiplied by the resistance and the duration of exposure. Because the epidermis offers significant initial resistance, ranging from 10 to 100 ohms depending on moisture and thickness, the electrical energy does not flow freely. It is converted into instantaneous thermal energy at the point of contact. This is not a simple nervous interruption. It is an internal high-zan intensity oven, where energy is released at such a violent rate that the biological structure has no time to perform dissipation through convection, conduction, or radiation. Physics here ignores biology. Imagine the moment of dielectric breakdown. The skin's natural insulation fails under extreme voltage, and the current desperately seeks the path of least resistance, which in the human case is our electrolyte-zan-rich internal fluids, such as blood and cerebrospinal fluid. In just 2 seconds of continuous exposure, the internal temperature of the bloodstream can reach peaks exceeding 60 C 140 F biologically. This temperature represents the absolute limit of organic matter integrity. It is the critical point where the hydrogen bonds that maintain the 3D-dimensional structure of proteins, such as hemoglobin and albumin, simply collapse, an irreversible process known as protein denaturation. The blood, which seconds before was a vital fluid for oxygen transport, now becomes a deadly heat transfer medium, cooking internal organs from the inside out on a microscopic timescale. This is a total breakdown of the body's thermal management. The heart, hit by this thermal wave, does not just stop. Its proteins coagulate, turning the muscle into a rigid, non-zen functional mass of cooked tissue. However, the physics of the event transcends mere thermal heating. We enter the traumatic domain of the phase transition of water. Within a closed and pressurized vascular system, the sudden boiling of these fluids generates explosive vapor pressure. The human body lacks the mechanical flexibility required to expand these fluids gradually. They are forced to vaporize in milliseconds within rigid compartments. This is the forensic mechanism behind the extreme traumas documented in executions. The sudden accumulation of steam generates a pressure differential that the structural walls of the eyeball and soft tissues are unable to contain. Put simply, the eyes pop out of their sockets not because of a muscle spasm, but because the water inside the vitreous humor became gas and demanded a volume that the skull and orbits could not provide. It is a steam explosion occurring within the confines of the human face. Call to action 2. We are only halfway through this biomechanical deconstruction, and the scenario is about to get even denser. If this scientific view of history is challenging what you thought you knew about the limits of the human body and the fragility of life under technical stress, leave a like right now. DaVinci Explains depends on your technical curiosity to continue producing elite documentaries that dissect reality without anesthesia. Subscribe to ensure that science and technical truth always have the last word on the great questions of the past. Moving forward in the analysis, we must observe the skull from the perspective of high-pressure mechanical engineering. The human skull is a rigid chamber, almost undeformable under normal conditions, designed by evolution to protect the central processor from external mechanical impacts. It follows the Monroe-Kelly doctrine, which states that the cranial vault is a fixed volume during electrocution. However, it is suddenly converted into a pressure vessel for the rapidly expanding vapor of the cerebrospinal fluid and brain tissue. We are observing the mechanical loading of a system that was never designed for a thermal overload of this magnitude. The increase in internal pressure causes the anatomy to suffer extreme structural failures, as the electrical energy input exceeds, by several orders of magnitude, the system's capacity to dissipate this heat through natural means. It is the thermodynamic collapse of a sealed structure. But there is another level of failure even deeper, the electrical one. Our cells depend on microscopic ion pumps to maintain an electrical potential difference between the inside and outside of the cell membrane, usually measured in millivolts. The external 0-volt current instantly nullifies these gradients. This is a total system override. The brain, flooded by heat and pressure, suffers an anoxic depolarization so vast and chaotic that consciousness ceases to exist long before the heart stops beating due to thermal inertia. It is the final short circuit of an electroactive machine that operates on millivolts being hit by kilovolts. The synapses are not just silenced, they are physically charred. The electric chair demonstrates a somber truth about our biological design. We are electrochemical machines operating within an extremely narrow thermal and ionic window, a fragile balance maintained by homeostasis. Our survival depends on maintaining specific voltages across cell membranes and temperatures that do not exceed the coagulation threshold of proteins. Exceed this margin even for a fraction of a second, and the human machine does not just cease its functions. It undergoes disintegration at a molecular and mechanical level. The nervous system stops transmitting because the ion channels are physically destroyed by heat. Cell membranes lose their resting potential, and solid tissue yields to the internal pressure of the steam. We were not built to withstand the currents that our own technological tools can generate. In that chair, the boundary between person and conductor is erased by the laws of physics. As we close this analysis, we are left with a reflection on entropy. Death in the electric chair is the result of an equation where the energy input made the maintenance of biological order mathematically impossible. We are imperfect conductors in a universe that demands thermal equilibrium above all else. Studying these moments is understanding that in the court of physics there are no appeals, only variables, constants, and the inevitable results of structural failure. The throne of justice is nothing more than the stage where biology surrenders, humiliated, to the implacable second law of thermodynamics. It is a reminder that the same forces that power our cities can, when misapplied to our fragile frames, reduce the complexity of a hum. Death in the electric chair is the result of an equation where the energy input made the maintenance of biological order mathematically impossible. We are imperfect conductors in a universe that demands thermal equilibrium above all else. Studying these moments is understanding that in the court of physics there are no appeals, only variables, constants, and the inevitable result of structural failure. The throne of justice is nothing more than the stage where biology surrenders, humiliated, to the implacable second law of thermodynamics. It is a reminder that the same forces that power our cities can, when misapplied to our fragile frames, reduce the complexity of a human life to a simple calculation of resistance and heat. The truth is rarely comfortable, but it is the only tool we have to understand who we really are beneath the skin and bone. If you've made it this far, you are part of the elite tier of viewers who value depth behind the facts and aren't satisfied with superficial explanations. Subscribe to DaVinci Explains, turn on notifications, and don't miss our next autopsy of history. Let us know in the comments what other execution method or historical mystery would you like to see deconstructed under the lens of pure science. Thank you for watching. Keep your mind sharp, your curiosity active, and keep the physics on your side. Until the next analysis.